It's not. It's got to tighten it.
WNHH.
This is too loose. Okay, thank you.
WNHH 5.
Public capital B. 13. Just 13.
Thank you.
Good morning and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. It's Monday, folks. The streets are filled with orange and black gowns. Two seas of marchers who the police are keeping separate from each other very deftly, in my observation. 2,500 protesters in orange gowns supporting Yale's graduate student union workers, trying to get a first contract with Yale, and they are marching on the street while Yale has its commencement, and 3,600 graduate and undergraduate students in caps and gowns. Some of them were overlapping. There are at least 3 people we saw, or reported Lucy Gums at the scene, who protested with the union, took off their orange shirt and had black gowns underneath and went to get their graduate degrees. So it's usually Mayor Monday, but today our mayor is a guest at Yale University's graduation, so we have Matthew Monday, Matthew Nemerson, who directs New Haven government's economic development policy as city development administrator. Welcome back to WNHH Studio. It's been too long, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Paul. You know I love radio, my first love, so
I
it's
know
great
you
to be here.
used to do a radio show in New York, and now you're one of our best guests here. And I'm going to ask you to get real close to that mic, so you're almost eating it.
You got it.
Today's program is made possible in part thanks to support from Bertram Moses and Devlin PC, and from Gateway Community College in downtown New Haven. Thanks, Gateway and Bertram, and thanks, Matthew, for coming up. Matthew, your job is trying to get people to build in New Haven, develop in New Haven, keep our neighborhoods in good shape. How do you feel about a new proposal that is at the Board of Alders to revolutionize the way we zone in New Haven and to change the way you would do your job to some extent? And this is a proposal you're familiar with and readers of The Independent might be familiar with. And that's to add a whole new category of zoning called high impact special exceptions, which is a fancy way of saying anytime Yale wants to build something, they're going to need an extra layer of approval, not just from the Zoning Commission, the City Plan Commission, but they're going to have to go through the whole Board of Alders, which these days is controlled by people who are critical of Yale, and to have any building at all, even if it doesn't change zoning, approved, and they have to spell out how that development would benefit or not benefit New Haven on a range of issues, from parking to local hiring to mass transit to open space. So what do you think, Matthew? They say this is bringing democracy to New Haven, more oversight by the legislature, the people's body, so that Yale, which they want to have develop in New Haven, would have to consider the community when it does so.
So, Paul, let me just start off by saying that you've been doing a lot of building here too. The place looks great.
Okay, yes, Harry Jost, our station manager, the bravest man in New Haven, proud Donald Trump supporter. He has redone the studio. Yeah.
And you know, Harry used to work for the chamber.
I do know that. He worked for you when you were at the chamber.
Deputy controller or something. I'm not exactly sure what he was. But
Harry, what were you back then? You weren't the Republican propagandist?
We were the Chamber of Commerce. Come on.
Yeah, I went. Actually, Matthew was a great boss. I went from bookkeeper all the way to system administrator.
Yeah. So we were very, very. I came from out of computers as a kid, and so we at the chamber had always the top technology. I think we had one of the first websites in the state, and we were always looking at technology. And Harry was a kid who came along and was really into that stuff, and we used him for everything we could get out of him. We didn't have a lot of money in those days. Anyway, but you look great here. I mean, people are obviously, it's the radio, but I know there are a lot of TV cameras watching us and everything, so it's a little bit like.
You know what I learned about that, Matthew?
What's that?
I couldn't figure out why Harry thought of Facebook Live, and I thought, Facebook Live, who's going to watch a radio show? And all of a sudden, we had hundreds of people more every hour watching live, and I asked people why, and they said they don't watch it on Facebook Live. They listen on Facebook Live. They have their computer open all day, and they have Facebook open, and that way they can pretend they're working, but listen to the show or actually look at the other documents. But it's been interesting to me about the way we find our audiences in new ways.
But you know, if you go way back before Jon Stewart and before Morning Joe and before sort of the current sort of regime of of news, people went to Don Imus. Imus in the Morning was sort of one of the first shows that made radio into a television production. And even though it was just like you're doing here with people sitting behind monitors and microphones.
I do remember that Imus used to be televised at some stations. Used to wonder why.
MSNBC.
Yeah,
I mean,
on
he was
the
there
radios,
before Morning Joe. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So what do you
Okay,
think about this new
so-
zoning proposal? Good idea?
So look, first of all, we have tremendous respect for the alders, and
That means we had better be nice to them, so let us do what we want.
well, what it means is that there is, I think, at every level of government, and I think this really goes back to Obama. The way the Congress was there was always a question of what's the legislative branch, what's the executive branch, and what are their roles. And so I think that it's not even about ideology or partisanship. It's just that the country has really sort of, I think, blurred those distinctions at a lot of governmental levels. I think it's because people, and this goes way back 20, 25 years, have lost some respect for government. And when you lose respect for government, I think you also lose respect for some of the way government is organized in terms of what are the executive prerogatives and what are the legislative prerogatives and what's the role of a CEO versus the board of directors and all that kind of stuff. So first of all, we got to deal with the reality of the fact that we have very strong people on the alders who have a lot of ideas. There were 30 of them, as you know, and they represent very small districts, 3,000, 3,500 people. So when they say they're speaking, to the people, for the people, they certainly have the ability to speak for very specific micro constituencies. And so that's just the reality. And, this mayor is a listening mayor, and she's a mayor who will always try to reach an accommodation where possible without getting into sort of a huge fight just to show who's boss. And so we are very much brought up in her, following her and supporting her. We're trying to make things work where possible. And so before there's a confrontation, we're going to try to figure out what people are saying and why they're saying it and try to understand how.
There are really interesting big picture theories behind this. So, for instance, what they'll say, the people put this proposal through, is that other cities actually have college zones. They allow universities to build only within a certain area. They're saying New Haven, we do want them to be able to expand and build, but when they do it, we want that extra level of scrutiny because they're the big people in town. It's really about Yale, even though Yale's not named in the legislature. And they feel that there ought to be a way to let them build everywhere, but every time they build, hold them accountable for how the building affects our employment, our mass transit, our parking situations.
So look, New Haven is an interesting place in that we're 130,000 people with this very sort of intense form of democracy with 30 alders, city council people in other cities, and also a very powerful central administration. We have a strong, as we say, we have a strong mayor, strong council, and strong commission form of government. Everybody's pretty strong.
We always had weak commissions and Board of Alders until Unite Here elected a majority of the Board of Alders. And the weakness wasn't in the design of government because we actually had a strong commission form of government, as you know, before Dick Lee became mayor in 1953.
Yeah.
And his first idea was get control of those commissions. But Unite Here elected a slate. They're the unions at Yale. And they're very active in elections. And they said if we have a slate, then we can have an agenda. And I don't think it's evil or secret, even though at first they weren't upfront about it. People said, okay, you get sort of Yale has a lot of power in town. Why not have the unions have another check on power and have their own agenda? And if they control, they support more than 20 of the alders, they have a supermajority, they can then press some ideas. So that's what they did here. The counter argument, now I guess, because the Hart administration wants to play nice and get along with these guys, the people you deal with, whether it's people at Yale who are building projects or other developers, they don't like the idea of having another layer of approval. You already go to the zoning board, the city plan commission, that takes months. Now you're going to have to deal with another body that's going to scrutinize you. And the idea is that, will they have another agenda? Because some people say that if they want to have union battles with Yale, will they hold up projects as we saw last year and make it hard for buildings to go on in New Haven in order to score points for their unions? And the argument that comes back with that is that if you have an alliance between members of a union and members of a community who elect you, you can have a bigger agenda that affects everyone. That if wages at Yale affect poverty and development in New Haven and employment, that becomes a city issue, along with the other issues you listen to your constituents about, like parking, which they're worried about Yale. So in a perfect world, that becomes a labor community alliance that's a check on Yale's corporate power. What other people felt last year was that it actually became a narrower agenda, where a union that wasn't concerned about, maybe run by people not in the city who weren't concerned about the tax rate or what's best for building, will hold progress hostage to advance a narrow agenda. Which way do you see it?
I guess I should be interviewing you today. It's the Paul Bass show. I'm just sort of here as the sidekick.
Now I'm trying to lay it out and see what
Yeah.
you think.
Well, look, I look at it as usual a little bit differently because we get so consumed with what's in the Independent, what's in the Yale Daily News, what's in this world of sort of the half of the city that's sort of all about Yale and all around downtown. We're still the central downtown and the central job creation zone for an area of 600, 700,000 people. We are a well-known place between Boston and New York. Many, if not most of our developers right now are coming from the Fairfield County area, or they're coming from the Boston area. These are people who are looking at maybe a dozen different towns or regions in which to invest in. So every time somebody builds something here in New Haven, they could have done something in Yonkers or New Rochelle, or they could have done it in Somerville or Cambridge, or in some cases, Jersey City or Newark or Hempstead. So, what I'm always looking at every day is trying to keep that pipeline of people who have many, many, many different choices, and in many cases are being hounded by these other towns with much bigger tax deals and with larger land masses where it's sort of easier to develop, where you're not all constrained. We're a very small place. So for me, it's all about, are we competitive? How many people do we have looking at each project? How many different developers still see New Haven as a great place to develop? Because yes, Yale does do a lot of investing and probably is more than 50% of all the development itself. But in order to have jobs and in order to have people living here and in order to have the tax base continue to grow, we have to be more than just Yale. We have to be a competitive economic zone between Boston and New York.
Does this zoning proposal affect the ability? Because last year the argument with Yale had a collateral damage. It almost blew a big project you had worked hard on to develop 11 acres of the hill. It had been developed for 35 years with a developer who was not part of Yale, but because there were concerns about Yale New Haven Hospital possibly being involved in it, it got held up for extra months. He almost walked. In the end, it was solved. Are you concerned about this new zoning proposal affecting people like that?
Well, that's just one example, Paul. I'm concerned about everything. I mean, I sleep well at night, but I come into the office with a list of 20 things I'm concerned about.
But I'm asking whether the zoning proposal affects non-university development, in your opinion.
Well, per se, perhaps not. I mean, having an intelligent conversation, if people are for growth, if they're for investment, the things that affect development are, very simple. There's really three things. What's the marketplace? How many people want to rent office space, want to lease apartments or buy them if it's in case of condos? What's the cost of money? Money is a commodity. Real estate is converting land into something of substance, and you have to pay money to do that. And so the cost of money, literally interest rates, and not just interest rates, but whether you can get an 80% loan or you have to get just 60% of the value of the project, how much equity, what's the ratio of equity, which is even more expensive. So it's a very simple sort of algorithm, a mathematical formula there. And the third thing is time and risk. And so a developer, the kinds of developers that we're talking about, the kind of projects we're doing in New Haven take about 18 months. Most of these developers like to have 2 or 3 things going on. And so they will be looking at maybe 9 projects at a time so that they can always have a pipeline of 2 or 3 projects. And you have 18 months. If it takes a year to get things developed, you can just sort of do the math and sort of figure out how many other places you have to have. So when any of those 3 things sort of get a little bit out of control, money, market, or time, then the developers go to Yonkers, or they go to Somerville, or they just take off some time and go on vacation.
But if they're smart, they go to WNHH Radio, your home for community radio at 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenandpenn.org, where you're listening to Dateline New Haven with Matthew Nemerson, the Economic Development Chief of New Haven, the guy who worries on our behalf about how to get people to build stuff. There's been a lot of building, and I guess I'm not going to get an answer from you, so I won't waste more time about the zoning laws, but that's
want
okay.
to talk about it because
It's okay if you don't want to address that.
No, we have to have a conversation.
I'm missing the rest you were talking about.
What people want is they want certainty, because by the time a developer comes before the Board of Alders, they've paid for lawyers, they've paid for accountants, they've paid for architects, they've paid for engineers, and oftentimes they have an option on a piece of land. So they may well be hundreds of thousands of dollars into a project. And if it's one of the 6 or 7 or 9 projects that they're looking at, they really like it to be one of the projects that they do, one of the 3 projects that they're doing over so uncertainty is the issue. So what I would say is that we actually have, I think, an excellent zoning process right now. It's probably one of the most involved in the Northeast. A lot of towns are trying to simplify their zoning, so many more things are as of right. And so I think we want to make sure we don't go too far in that direction. When a developer comes here, they should be able to look at a parcel and say, I know I can build a building.
So let's say a developer who might develop along with Yale, does that developer have to worry now that if he's doing a project with Yale, if Wayne Stanley wants to do something with Yale, for instance, or Salvatore, does he now have to worry that they're going through this special exception process with the Yale Alders?
Well, again, I'm not really sure what you mean developing with Yale. I mean, Yale hires general contractors and construction managers.
But they don't do co-development deals like on George Street or anything like that. Wasn't there one in consideration there?
No, I mean, not
so,
really.
So maybe this bill doesn't have to affect what you're doing then, except for when Yale wants to
No,
build.
I think it does, because because I think the final thing, because of those 3 things, market, money, and time, Yale is one of the main determinants of the market.
Oh,
so
if Yale can't build, someone else might not do as
Yale
well.
expanding, Yale competing, like the new biotech building on Whitney Avenue, which is a huge building. It's a $200 million building, the Gibbs Laboratory. There's been a lot of sort of construction of the demolition of the old building in Whitney Avenue. That will bring in an influx of tens, if not hundreds, of biotech researchers working at Yale, getting grants, expanding Yale's ability to compete.
So they got to live
Princeton
somewhere.
and Harvard.
Someone might want to build an apartment building nearby.
But Harvard's building buildings too, and Stanford's building buildings, and Michigan is. So the issue is there are only so many grants out there. We don't know exactly where all the Trump initiatives are going to go in terms of NIH, which is the National Institutes of Health, or the National Science Foundation. You know, having great facilities, having teams of researchers coming here from around the world to work in great buildings. That there is an arms race, if you want to call it that, between all the great universities of the world, and this includes places in China and England and Europe and Africa and South America and North America, for great facilities to attract the top minds. And so much of the legwork for great new biotech and also computer breakthroughs happens at the university level now, because there just aren't as many big R&D departments.
So you're worried that this ordinance can if it slows some of that down, or then slow down collateral development that you're also trying to bring?
Absolutely. And those are the people who then rent the apartments, and those are the people who then eat in our restaurants, and those restaurants are the people who hire people. You know, if we're going to be a sanctuary city, which we're all very proud of, you have to have jobs that someone can come into America, maybe not speak the language, and be able to get a job right away. Those have traditionally been in leisure, entertainment,
So
restaurant,
Matthew, you spoke
whatever.
earlier about if developers want to come, we became one of those cities like Yonkers and New Rochelle where they want to build. It has kind of happened to some extent, right? Like you became development administrator 3 years ago, and you've been working on development in New Haven, where you grew up, as an adult for 35 years. So something very different has happened
Some
over the
people say I'm
last
still
3
not an
years.
adult, but yeah, but basically, right.
Wouldn't you agree with me, Matthew, that for the first 30 years you were watching development in New Haven, we used to have to entice people to build here. We used to say, if you build here, we'll give you tax abatements. And we still give things like phase-ins or do public improvements, but we no longer give these need, it appears, to offer major tax breaks to build here because the market is better. So you've been dealing in your 3 years of people like Randy Salvatore, who put up the novella at Chaplain Howe, who's now building out the project in the Hill.
Yeah, Spinnaker, other places.
Now, Spinnaker's been interesting to me because you notice these builders, they come from Fairfield County. And they wanted to do a big project, 400 to 500 apartments right on the other edge of downtown, the beginning of Worcester Square, But that's been tied up for, what is it, 3 years?
Well, they've got a number of different projects, but you're right. There was about a 200 unit project in Worcester Square, and that's been tied
Chapel and
up
Olive.
for challenges over the zoning changes. We had to do zoning changes, and another developer who has an adjoining parcel has been challenging
It's
every.
really factoring in.
Yes, so that's that's an interdevelopment developer warfare where an existing developer is trying to stop a new developer from coming into town. We don't see a lot of that in New England because there has been sort of a
That must
tradition.
get you really frustrated. So that's been tied up in lawsuits. You went to court. A judge ruled in your favor a year ago.
We've had 3 judges rule in our favor.
So how can you
three
can't go
times.
forward?
Well, this is a great country, and we have appeals. And
Well, why not? Can't you go to court in the meantime, saying if we've gotten 3, we can begin to build, or no?
The developer could go to build, but if something were to happen,
He doesn't want to jeopardize.
well, the
money.
zoning might not be approved, and then you'd have to tear it down.
So how long is he going
but
to?
let me.
Is he
But
going to hang in?
Spinnaker does have this other, even
Right, I was going to
larger
get to that. I was
project
going to get
at
to
the
that
other
as the
end.
contrast. So here he got held up. It's been
Yeah.
years where this guy's wanted to build. Some other guy doesn't want to fix up his place to compete with it. Is tying you up with zoning appeals.
Yeah.
What's the outlook? Is the guy going? Is Spinnaker A going to hang in? And B, what is the status? How much longer till we get definitive?
This is a great project. You just have to imagine we don't have television here, but if I had a picture of it, this is the parking lots and the old Comcast building between downtown and Worcester Square. It's the nicest, best parcel for housing development in the city. If you were to pick one place that you were going to want to put,
And it's a
in your
great
project,
location because the way
it's a great
City Town's
location.
grown and Worcester's been
And
hot.
Worcester
You want
Square
to
is
walk
so
to work
hot.
and the train. Yeah.
Exactly. The train station's there.
But are we
Worcester
gonna get
Square's
this,
there.
or
Oh,
is it-
yes, it's going to happen.
The guys,
eventually.
it's lucrative enough that he's willing to.
There
How
are
much
only- There
longer?
are only so many more appeals.
How
you
many
can do.
appeals are there?
Well, you never can tell because you don't know exactly what they're appealing on, and our lawyers. There's a possibility it could be this year that we could get the approval to go ahead. We're very hopeful of that.
And now Spinnaker, meanwhile, this guy says, "Hey, we want to," and this is so alien.
loves
People
New
like
Haven.
people like you and me who for years watched these negotiations where they beg people to build. All of a sudden, this guy says, "Meanwhile, let me go down to this block that's been a parking lot for you, a super block," which I just learned what that means, at Audubon, State, Grove, and Orange,
Yep.
and he wants to build a whole mini city there, kind of thing. But
Well-
there, you didn't have objections, did you?
Well, it's almost an as of right because of some other zoning.
That means
issues
he's
there.
allowed to do that pretty much without having to change zoning
Exactly.
rules.
He needed to get approval to build more than 200 parking spaces, but the building itself is a different situation.
And there he's talking about how like hundreds of apartments and some stores and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Right?
it's going to be great. It's going to be, if you know what the Corsair is like down at the end of State Street, where it's just sort of changed that whole neighborhood there. This is going to be a similar, actually bigger, actually 1.5 times as big.
Wow.
It'll have retail, it'll have parking.
So where are we on that now? What was surprising about
That's
that
moving
is that got its approvals in no time. I didn't see any protests. I saw some people raise some questions about the whole issue about cars, not cars. But in general, you got that approved pretty fast in a period of months, right?
Absolutely. People have some legitimate issues about all the traffic now that will be crossing Orange Street, which is a narrow street, and because of its
Which is a problem we want to have.
we do want to have it, but we want to make sure people are safe. And because it's near the highway entrance over at Trumbull Street, we just have to make sure that during rush hours that people are.
So where are we in approval processes?
They're moving ahead. They've got approval.
So when do the shovels go on the ground?
They talked to them on Friday, and they are finishing the design for the garage. The garage has to come first because they have to move the cars off the space. So they're going to temporarily move the cars off.
Oh, right, because SNET, which is now SBC, which is now
Frontier.
they parked there and they had to have permission. They had to win a
Exactly.
promise they could still park there in the garage.
Exactly. So we're going to build a 700-car parking garage. There are about 550 cars. They're on the site now. So there'll be some parking for the new tenants, and then there'll be the parking for the existing workers, and that will go up first. And so they're being designed. And so the very first thing that you will see will be a building permit for that garage, and the very first construction that you'll see will be the foundation for that garage, which will go sort of right in the middle of the block
Oh,
there.
good. So
And then everything will be built out around it. So that should start, we're hoping, early this fall.
early this fall.
And the permit should come in, we hope, this year. I mean, this fiscal year.
Now, there's an even bigger project planned for where the New Haven Coliseum used to be. That deal was struck before you became the development administrator.
That's true.
And they got, for some reason, 14 years to build it when they got their approval. And it's tied into public improvements. I believe it's $21 million from the state and $12 million from New Haven. I probably have those numbers off. To fix the street grid around there in ways we wanted to anyway, to the sunken highway and all that.
Exactly. There's $33 million to
Oh, I got
connect.
the number right.
Yeah, it's 12 from us and 21.5 million from the state, and that's just to connect Orange Street from the edge of the Knights of Columbus building, where it ends now, just literally ends there, to connect it over to behind the
Right.
police station.
But
so
in the
that will
meantime,
change the whole.
A lot of us have
transportation
become
system.
very skeptical about whether this is ever going to happen. You walked into a lot of problems when you inherited that project, one of which was it turned out you couldn't move all those utilities except the prohibitive price. So at another project 10, you found a way to work around that easily. Here you had to convince the developer, and it took a long time to redraw his project so that you don't have to move the utilities. Is he on board, and where are we in the status of him doing drawings that will get state approval that will open up the money to make this possible?
Yeah, so it's one of those crazy things where you exactly said it right. We had this whole deal with all of these different conditions, the things that we had to do, things he had to do, but somehow there was this one big problem that was there were gas lines, electric lines, sewer lines, and water lines that all went through part of the site, and they had to be moved. And it was so complicated and so expensive that the decision was made in 2013 that somebody else could worry about it, and that somebody else was Mayor Harp and myself. And so we then, really the first week on the job, we knew about this, and we sort of got into it, and we went down and we started talking to the utilities and talking to the governor and talking to the developer. And we spent about 2.5 years with a plan to get the
It's really amazing how many years urban development could take as opposed to a strip mall in a suburb where you just throw something up.
You bet. So we had a plan worked out, and we pretty much had a handshake agreement with the electric company. We were still working on the gas company and all the other things to move the electric lines at their expense under a sort of an obscure ordinance or law in the Connecticut regulatory books. But then they were bought, as you know, by a large European company, Iberdrola, and they got rid of all their lawyers, and they came back and they offered a different deal, which was we'll move it, we'll expedite the moving of it, but we don't agree with you and your interpretation of the law, so we'll agree in a friendly sort of way, we'll go to court. And but we'll move the electric lines now, and then we'll go to court. Could take 3-4 years, and whatever the court decides, whether our interpretation, which is you have to pay us the money, or your interpretation, which is the ratepayers have to pay for.
And they're going to have better lawyers, so you're not going to win that one.
Right. Well, I think we have pretty
Come
good
on,
lawyers.
Spanish energy giant compared to what we can afford. Give me a break.
We had some excellent lawyers, and our lawyers said we might be able to win. But they threw in one little caveat. They said, but in order for us to start on time, you have to put up an escrow account, basically, for what it will cost in case we win.
Smart. You see, I told you they're good lawyers.
Right. So we said, we actually went to the developer and we said, well, we can continue along this track, but you've got to put up $15 million as an escrow. And they said no.
But one thing I learned from
So
you, Matthew,
now they are
is that you
redoing
learn that
all
way
of
to
this
do it
stuff.
is not try to do expensive street regrade when you can avoid it. I mean, we do want to get rid of the 34 connector, but like as in the Hill project, try not to move the utilities or change if you don't have to, just redraw the project. And that took you like a year to convince the developer to do, right?
You know, one of the sobering things here is, and the mayor always keeps reminding us, we are not the capital city. And, you know, there are some things that every state does for its capital city. There are things that Rhode Island does for Providence. There are things that Connecticut does for Hartford. There are things that actually New York did for Albany that you just don't get in other places. And so we really have to, we can't always expect the state to sort of.
Wait a second, the state's funding up $21 million here. They kind of feel like, why haven't you guys gotten it together to get this project moving?
And
It's
I'm not
3
being
years
critical,
later.
but you know, the state.
What should the state have done?
Well, see, the state. Well, we asked the state for an extra $15 million to move the
Yeah,
utilities.
but they
We
like
did
you
that
would
in
say just
February in
redraw the project.
2014.
They said just redraw the project.
Well, but there are consequences of that. I mean, all these things have consequences, and so now they're trying to redraw it, and now we're sitting down with them again, and we have created basically a deadline, as you know, we've reported in your newspaper of June 30th, and so we are very hopeful that the developer we'll do the third thing, which the governor asked, because the governor said one of the reasons that we're going to make this investment is because there's going to be a big conference center hotel on this site, and they're very hard to do. And he said, before I approve the final
We want the hotel
bond money, I want
to be in.
I want to make sure the hotel is there. So, but the hotel couldn't go there because the place for the hotel was right on top of the utility lines. So that's why we were trying to move the utility lines so that we could get
And
the
I thought you
hotel
got
there.
them to agree to move the hotel to the
We
other
have,
corner
we
of
have.
State Street and Martin Luther
We
King.
absolutely have. So we now have plans with the hotel on the other side of the utility lines, and we're just waiting to see if, in fact, everything comes together in some sort of a fashion that the governor will believe that it's strong.
Well,
enough
Matthew, I know
to
that
do
this is, you inherited this deal that gave the developer all the cards by having 14 years before he has to do anything. But
But Paul, can I say, there are many different interpretations. You're saying he has 14 years. We're not. I'm not going to say that we agree
also, it
with
sounds
that,
like your
but-
lawyers have been doing some work to see what leverage you might have. Okay.
We have many
So, all
lawyers.
right, let's hear from our lawyers.
Well, we think that each side has to do certain things and that they might be concurrent. So while it is clear that there are some things that we haven't done, we think there are some things the developer hasn't done.
So in other words, we're now getting to the point where you're going to tell them, look, this has gone on too long. If you don't start making some progress, we're going to take this away from you and give it to someone else because we've been waiting too long to develop that.
Well, I wouldn't use those words, but I would say that we have June 30th as a deadline for all of us to decide that this is the development and the scheme
But
that
if
we
they
have.
say we're not going to do what you want, but we still have another 11 years, what are you going to say? We've looked at the documents and you don't have that freedom that you think you have because you failed to fulfill certain obligations.
That's a possible thing
So what
that
did
we
you
might
find?
say.
What did you find? What did you re-examine?
It's these development documents are like 150 pages, and
Yeah, I'm
sometimes
curious what page
they're a
was
little,
it?
they're a little
Sounds like you found a
circular.
good page. What page?
We didn't find any one page, and we're certainly not going to tell you what page we found, but we believe
You
that
should tell us what page.
no,
you
we're
found.
not going to do that. But we believe that that this thing has to make sense for everybody, and at some point. We are great believers in what Live, Work, Learn, Play has done around the
That's the
world.
developer from Montreal.
And we think that their vision is spectacular, and we think that they have, as partners with other people, built projects that we would be proud to have in this location. And we are hoping that they will be able to come to the table by June 30th with.
That means,
the
in
momentum.
translation, put up or shut up time for Live, Work, Learn, Play is June 30th.
Were there other questions you had?
Yeah, they are. But first, I'm going to remind people that they're listening to Dateline New Haven on WNHH Radio, your home for community radio at 103.5 FM, and live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. Matthew Nemerson, the city's development administrator, is our guest today. We're talking about different development projects in town. One of them, just lastly on the Coliseum site. So one take I hear from some people, including other developers, is when this plan was put together, you didn't put it together, the developer wowed the city. This was prime real estate. A lot's happening in New Haven, right in the center of our town, by the train station, by Hotwooster Square neighborhood, by 9th Square with successful development. We have this big piece of property that nothing's happening with, the former Coliseum site. And this developer came who said everything New Haven wanted to hear. A rare project that got everybody happy. He usually argues the new urbanists, the people who want density. Maybe it was too good to be true.
And don't forget, a large union hotel.
Yeah, maybe it was too good to be true. Maybe the reason we haven't seen this project, because Matthew, come on, you got to admit, stepping back from PR, that it's now been 4 years and zero has happened while these other projects have gone around town, prime real estate in town. Do you think it's possible, in fact, this was just a loser idea that's never going to happen because this guy can't pull it off, or the idea just doesn't work in the market?
Well, it's not a loser idea.
Why haven't we seen it then if it's such a good idea?
It's a great idea. Well, because it's in the way it was presented to us in December of 2013, it was like a $380 million deal. $380 million deals often take 5 to 10 years.
And now it's $500 million, right? Or is it
No,
400
it's
million?
actually been stepped back. It's actually much smaller now, which actually makes more sense. It was a lot of wine in a smaller bottle. There's a lot of stuff going on there. Look, projects of this complexity actually take a long time. What I think we have to look at, and I know you say this is just PR, but we've done so many other projects that have brought vitality to the core of downtown. This is a project which was, in a sense, one of the reasons this was so exciting when it was first conceived by Herb Newman in the late 90s as a way to rethink where the Coliseum was and then rethink the connection to the train station, had to do with stuff that is actually about to happen, which is what's going to happen to the train station, what's going to happen to Church Street South, what's going to happen eventually to the police station. You know, in a funny way, this project is still linked more to things to its south than to its north. North and west of this project are doing great. George Street has development that no one could even have dreamt of in 2012 and 2013. What's happening all along from Park Street and Howe Street down along Chapel Street, amazing stuff. So, you know, in a funny way, we are getting all of the development that we had hoped for. We're just getting it in other places. No one could have dreamt the Corsair would be as big and as successful. So we're actually doing things that we needed to do to support restaurants, to get more people on the street. This was always sort of the 10th square, as people have called it. This was always, well, how do we sort of link to that other part of town on the other side of the highway and make a connection? Of course, we're going to do this project, and of course, we're excited about the project. And yes, we do need a big hotel. We're under-hoteled right now. But in terms of all of the things that it was going to bring, hundreds of housing units, lots of retail, those are all coming. We're getting many more restaurants, streets that we never thought would sort of fill in. I mean, look at how dark the corner of Crown and Temple was just 2 years ago. And we were like, oh my God, what's going on with Crown and Temple? We now have two of the hottest restaurants that are packed every night, Olives and Oil and Jimmy's on that corner. And the restaurant K2 across the street, which wasn't doing very well now has
downtown's booming.
Has jazz.
And
No, what I'm saying is that even places that we were really worried about, specific
and yet a block from the train station, which should be the best place to market to people who might want to walk. I mean, 360 State a block up is doing great.
Oh yeah, 360 is doing great. But what I'm saying is, we don't have to worry about whether the Coliseum project is under construction right now, because when you start seeing Spinnaker go up, when we start implementing some of the plans that we have to sort of redesign State Street and sort of fill in on both sides of the Chapel Street corridor, there's so much stuff going on. It's like New Haven has this death wish that's like, you know, it's the old Jewish joke. You know, your mother gives you two ties and you go upstairs and you come down with one of them and you say, Mom, what do you think about my tie? And she said, why didn't you wear the other one? What's wrong with the other one? And the point is, we have so many developments going on. We have so many things.
So you're
that
not
are
worried at
happening.
all that the prime real estate there is
worried.
sitting fallow 3 years after you got it and there's no hope in sight?
I am not worried at all, and I'll tell you why. Because right now, the main weakness that we have in downtown is parking, because of the success
So you're okay with the surface parking lot there
of
for now?
Gateway. Gateway, you know, took
Yeah.
700 spaces, prime spaces that we had in Temple Street.
So you're kind of glad we have a surface lot there?
I'm delighted we have a surface lot here.
First time
because
I've ever heard you say that. You hate surface lots. You
Well,
want to
I
build
do.
on them.
I do, but Paul, if I had to pick one block for the next 3 or 4 years that was a surface parking lot that wouldn't impact many restaurants. I mean, there are no restaurants facing that. The Knights of Columbus are also surface lots. You know, we have some very good news, and you know, I am here to sort of bring good news. The Knights of Columbus spent the last 10 years looking around, deciding if they were going to make a major commitment to stay in New Haven. They had bought some spectacular land down in the Northern Virginia area. They have a lot of connections. Obviously, they're a huge North American fraternal insurance company and fraternal organization. And as much as their roots were here, you know, they were wondering, is this the place where they were going to spend the next 50 years, 100 years? And the fact that they have decided, yes, that they are recommitting to their building, they're recommitting to the block that their building is on, that they're moving, that they're selling land in other places, that they're committing to this, that's huge. That's a major story that no one talks about. I don't know why. I guess because they're kind of secretive. They don't talk
Why did
about
they
it that
make
much.
that decision?
Well, they've been making it over the last year and a half. I mean, it's a very, very interesting story. And they're now...
That's one block from the Coliseum.
Well, what I'm saying is that's where we're focusing on right now is what are their office needs? What are their parking needs? What kind of hotels are they looking for?
They want to build on the plaza, correct?
Well, I don't know exactly where they want to build. We've sold them all the parking lots that were on the west side of underneath where the Coliseum was. So they've got parking lots. They've got 2 parking lots. They've got the old park there. You know, right now, a city of our size, anywhere in the country, would be really focusing on what are the needs of one of, if not their major private corporation, their big insurance company. And look at all the attention that the insurance companies are getting up in Hartford. So, you know, or other places. So we're very, very delighted that they have made their decision to commit to not only to New Haven, but commit to that location. So right now, as important as the Coliseum project is, the Knights are our client number 1 right now, and we're trying to figure out what their expansion needs are, what their parking needs are, what they would like that whole environment
Might they ever
to be
want
there.
that block? Or might they ever want the Coliseum site?
Well, we've talked to them not about wanting the whole block, but is there a possibility of some of the buildings that would be on that site to be integrated into a development? It just sort of makes sense to look at that development.
So they might be your backup if live, work, learn, play never becomes a reality.
No, it isn't a backup. It's more of looking at it more holistically. I mean, looking at these things not as super blocks,
Oh, it's portions of the block.
but just as, you know.
And are they nonprofit when they have this areas? Do we get to tax them?
Well, I'm pretty sure we tax them. I don't think. I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I don't think that nonprofit organizations. I don't think they've submitted for tax. I think.
Okay. But we are going to remind people you listen to Dateline New Haven, WNHH New Haven's home for community radio, broadcasting 103.5 FM, live streamed at newhavenpen.org. Got a few minutes left here with Matthew Nemerson, the Economic Development Administrator for the City of New Haven. Matthew, several times in this episode, you have mentioned the word Corsair. Now, for people who don't know what that is, that's partially an old factory and then a vacant lot that got rebuilt on Upper State Street, right before you get to the I-91 overpass the second time, and up the hill toward Hamden. And it's just it's a beautiful place. I've gotten the tour, and it you know, it's got that whole kind of old industrial look, which is partly real, partly recreated. They're renting pretty expensive apartments there. I think, like I'm talking about, like $1,500 a month for a 1-bedroom, or is that $2,000?
Well, that's the market. It's probably higher than that.
wealthy.
It's probably $2,100 for a 1-bedroom.
But they have this whole community. They have like pizza ovens everybody uses, all these gathering spaces, a pool, and it's really beautiful. It's great New Haven art all over the place, and it's the edge of what we call the Goldfield part of East Rock. What's interesting to me about that was that the neighborhood negotiated a deal they wanted. There was an earlier development for that site, and they didn't stay because of complaints with the neighborhood. And we heard, well, gee, you know, neighborhood stopped development. They're worried about losing parking on their street and issues like that. And then the developer came back and dealt with Jessica Holmes, the same alder who was involved with the zoning proposal that's making it very nuts. And they actually worked out a deal people were happy with. Now, is that place full?
Well, I have no idea if it's full yet. They keep adding different pieces of it.
Because I had heard it was not renting as easily as, let's say, 360 State, which is this amazing success there. Although I've met people who live there, and one couple I met, they have these couples, these kind of people moving to cities now with the kind of new job market. One is a doctor in Providence, and the other, the spouse, is a doctor at Yale in the medical school. So they thought this was a cool place to live, right by the highway, and so that's good.
Well, it's a spectacular place. I mean, you mentioned the pool. There's outdoor movie theaters. There's a library. There's an indoor movie theater. There's a whole bar, as you said.
And that was just kind of a desolate stretch. He's now on the other side of the highway.
No, it's look. I mean, again, we have to feel good about ourselves.
Yeah, no, that was a success.
And cities, you know, we used to think of cities as sort of self-contained areas. People lived in the cities, worked in the cities, and then they eventually lived in the suburbs and worked in the cities. Now people live in cities and work everywhere. And some work in the city, but some could work, as you said, in Providence or Hartford. It's right by the highway. It's right by the train station. You know, we see Jersey City expanding. We see Providence expanding.
Except when the Kushners want to try and make a deal with China. But Matthew, so on the other side of the highway, we have 2 other, I mean, this is a success time here. Right. On the other side of the highway, you have 2 big lots that you've also been looking at. The first, right on the part of the highway, is an old Connecticut Transit bus depot, and you negotiate a deal and pick the developer the community was happy with to build a Google-type incubator space with the community lots. Now, originally, Amazon wanted to put its warehouse there, right? The warehouse that originally went to Wallingford.
No,
it was right off the highway.
No, it wasn't. No, actually, it was originally U-Haul wanted to get it for their
storage, and you didn't want
storage.
storage there. You thought that wasn't highest
Right,
best use to pay
exactly.
neighbor. What happened with Amazon? They never wanted inquiry. Did I get that wrong?
No, it was never big enough. Amazon's been looking at 1 million square foot footprint in the region.
So they never inquired about that in the property across the street.
Amazon never.
So you picked, in that case, you had a New York developer who owned the old Robbie Lens factory across the street, promised to fix that up with $1 million. Now he's walking. He's not fixing that up.
Well, he sold it to U-Haul at the end of the day.
So they're going to store
You
it.
know,
there.
he was. It's one of those difficult things that we deal with all the time.
Just so our listeners know that you had a whole process. You brought in politicians, neighbors who said, what do we want to do with this bus depot land? You could have, in the old days, just sold it to this New York developer who owned the property across the street. But you guys decided, and the community decided, they'd rather have these homegrown New Haven companies like Digital Surgeons that wanted to invest in a tech campus that was more like the jobs of future for Connecticut. People are here. They brought in other entrepreneurs, like the guy who has the cheese place, Casius, who's going to do a beer garden and a canoe launch. So just like with the Coliseum site, we got this idea of what we'd like development to be, and we gave them the shot to build it. How's that going?
Well, it's going
It's
fine.
called District. It's on James
It's
Street.
called the district. You know, I mean, that's one narrative that you've described. You know, when we met with Jason Carter, before we had even worked out the deal with the state, when they agreed to do all the remediation.
To let you have that land
Right,
built
because
on.
the issue is that the state often, and this is true whether it's the military at the federal level, the Department of Transportation, they don't often behave or treat things with the same kid gloves that they expect the private sector to. So there was a lot of pollution there, and we knew there was a lot of hydrocarbons underground, and they had just sort of dumped
And you
a
got
lot
the
of
state
things
to
there.
agree to clean
Well,
up some of it.
The state has actually been wonderful. I mean, one of the amazing things that I think the governor doesn't get enough credit for is, as a mayor, is he realized that brownfields are the scourge of cities.
And those
that,
are polluted old lands where factories used to be that we want to build
well, that
on,
means
but
that,
can't poison.
we built things in the 19th century and the early 20th century, and we hired a lot of people, and we brought people from all around the world, but there just weren't the standards. And so a lot of companies will tell you they didn't know that things shouldn't just be dumped out in the backyard. But at the end of the day, there was a lot of pollution there. So the state not only sort of owned up to their own responsibilities to help cities get brownfields money, but they said, and this was our brownfield problem. So rather than just sort of keep it fenced in and keep it sort of off the market, we're going to figure out how much it's going to cost. And it turns out it's over $5 million. We're going to clean it up, and then we're going to basically give it to you for $1. And we'd like you to use it for something impressive. So we said, great. And we actually had looked at a lot of things. We looked at the police station going there. We had looked at public works going there. And we were thinking that if we put the police station there, we could move the police station.
Carter wanted a supermarket, right?
We looked at Wegmans, which is a big, high-end, beautiful, big supermarket. So at the end of the day, when we figured stuff out and we looked at how much land you needed for parking and this and that, we realized that we really only had about 100,000 square feet of land left. And so the question then became, the owner of the building across the street said, well, I would like to use it as parking because I would like to do what you're talking about doing there. I'd like to put the district, in essence, at 1175, and
The
I'd
old
like
Robbie
to
Lens
tear
factory.
this down and make it into parking. We said, well, that really doesn't fit what we want to do. We'd like them both to be. And so what I said is, better deal, we'll build both of them as the district, double district, and we'll help get funding for a parking garage there. If the issue is that there's not enough parking on the two sites, I would rather have 250 or 300,000 square feet of high-tech space and light manufacturing space and restaurants and things and build structured parking than tear down 100,000 square feet so you can build the district on the other side. So that was sort of the conversation that we had, and we couldn't really reach agreement. And so, as you saw, and this is the downside of be careful what you plan for, when we finally had the competition and we picked the plan that we really liked, and we gave the other owner a chance to come in and submit his plans were still parking or some big retail. And so he got angry at us, and he ended up selling the building to U-Haul, which was exactly the user that we didn't want. Now, but there's a happy ending here, because sometimes people do things out of spite. Surprise, surprise. Sometimes people get angry because they think their plans are better, and he thought that should be parking, his building should be the building. And we said, no, they should both be buildings, we'll build more parking. But here's the funny thing. So U-Haul built it, and I was very upset about that, because it's not nice when people do things out of spite that hurt us. He got the same amount of money because U-Haul ended up spending the same amount of money that anybody would have spent for the building. So he did fine. We were sad about that. But now U-Haul has come to us and they said, we only need half the building for storage. We're going to look at the other half, which is still 100,000 square feet or if not more, to put high tech in there or to put other uses there.
Which has always been the thought for that.
That was always the thought. So we always said to him, well, you can use some of it for storage. So happy ending in the end. So sometimes we worry that things will go really badly. And
I was
it's
never
actually gonna
convinced
do
that having
fine.
some of that area for U-Haul is bad if there's a market for it.
No, there is a market for it.
So now you've been involved in talks in Westville to build on the old Delaney site. This
Yep.
developer who's going to cobble some properties together and put a couple of restaurants up. He wanted to put a Hooters up there originally. Did you guys say that's just wrong for New Haven, or are we going to see?
Well, I
Hooters?
didn't hear that. That must be like the Amazon stuff.
Oh, okay.
We didn't hear Hooters. We always pretend Taco Bell. We always say we don't want a Taco Bell. Look, the Delaney site has been an inn or a restaurant or a tavern like for 160 years or something. I mean, it's burned down a couple of times, I think. We need to replace that with something that's iconic that will bring people back. Westville is such a fabulous center.
It is. It's happening.
It needs things to anchor it, and that's a good investment.
Yeah,
I know
it's
there's
gonna.
been questions in the paper about whether it's a good investment. Of
No,
public
people
dollars.
are supporting what's
But I
going
think
on in
that's a good
Westville, and it's a good day in Westville, a good day in New Haven. Matthew Nemerson, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Paul.
Any parting last word in 30 seconds of what you're most excited about next in New Haven?
I have to tell you, I really am so excited working for Tony Harp, because when you look at what is wrong with government and what is wrong with America, it's that we're angry at each other and we're not willing to sit and listen to people. And we have a leader who brings people together and is a good leader in a way because she leads without having her own ego on the table. She just listens to people. And that is an exciting place to be right now. And I'm just so proud to be involved, one, in government, just at this point in my life and career, but two, to be with a person who is the epitome of what government should be. And I think we're the role model for where this country needs to go.
All right, ad for Tony Harp, courtesy of our Economic Development Director. And we want to thank Bertram Moses and Dateline PC and Gateway Community College for providing financial support for today's program. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Matthew Nemerson. Always great to have you on. I always feel like we could talk about 2 more hours about the stuff we never got to. You're involved in so much interesting work in New Haven, and you're making it a better place. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD A Plea for Peace. Now, we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight. Book your flight with us all day and all night long here at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.